Welcome, Professor Ute Meta Bauer. You are a well-known curator and scholar and director of the Center for Contemporary Art at Nanyang Technical University. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your organization?
Yeah, I serve here in Singapore since 2013 as the founding director of a contemporary art center that has been established by our university with support for the Economic Development Board of Singapore. And it's actually the first and only national research center with a focus on contemporary art. And we in particular focus on spaces of the curatorial, because that is a very interesting field in Southeast Asia to really understand art history from a different angle in a place where there are less institutions. Of course, there are increasing institutions today, but historically. So one really has to look into the history of exhibitions to really understand how art history has evolved. And of course, there were spaces associated to that. So that is more on our research end. What we do, otherwise we have like 3 pillars. We have exhibitions, and we do mainly international exhibitions of contemporary art. That includes, of course, Singaporeans, they're also international. We have artists in residency, our artist in residency program with both local, Southeast Asian, and as we say, rest of the world, artists joining us for 3 to 6 months in 7 studios. We also have visiting curators program, a visiting writers program. And last but not least, we are also an academic entity. We have fellows, we do research, we have postdocs. And we also are co-owning a master in museum studies and curatorial practice, which is the first one in the region.
It sounds very vibrant and rigorous at the same time.
It's quite a lot to do.
Yeah. So, and particularly given your concentration on the artistic and the curatorial space, I wondered if I could ask you how you as an organization have responded to the current pandemic crisis of COVID-19.
I mean, it's multifaceted. I mean, like as I said before, we really also have to look in this region in the history of establishing institutions. And of course, we were also here, or our mandate is also to develop capability. And that means, as I mentioned already, in academic education, in short-term seminars, in lectures, etc. But we are also a very front-facing entity. That means we are addressing a wider public. And of course, through the restrictions of COVID, like elsewhere in the world, we were shut down during what was called here a circuit breaker. And that makes a big disconnect to our audiences. And for us, it's very important to have this personal contact, to really be there for a conversation, to open doors for maybe a public that is sometimes less secure. They want to know a bit more about the arts. And so I think this personal contact, not only to me, but to our whole team, to artists that come here, it has been very significant to develop a kind of a community. I mean, this community, of course, has been here, but to widen this community and to address this, I think, and that doesn't count only for us, but to all the art institutions and other institutions, it's a big challenge to be so disconnected from our local audience. Yeah, internationally, we always had to operate through social media, online, and that's what we also do, not just since the pandemic. But we had to pretty much gear up this site, also in terms of teaching. And while everybody thinks one has nothing to do because the institution is closed, it takes a fair bit to get this part going, particularly if all staff works from home, or like not everybody has a video camera at home, or like proper gear, like we have now here for this interview. And but on the other side, we were not alone in this. And what was very interesting for me is how institutions reached out to each other. How do you deal with this? How you handle this? Can we do something together? How can we help artists in this moment when they lose exhibitions and commissions? How can we help you? We are reopening, but you're still closed. Can we show something? I thought it was really stunning to see such degree of solidarity. And that was for me let's say in all the challenges, that we had a very positive experience.
So from what you've said, I gather that you have a combination of both some in-person or in real life events and continue some activities insofar as they're possible with social distancing and proper protective equipment. And then on the other hand, you have enhanced your digital activities, or am I wrong in that, taking that from what you've said?
No, that's absolutely correct. But for a while, we only had online offerings simply because we were closed for about 3 months. And of course, we then said, like, we don't want to lose our community, and we have a lot of material. We had artists in residence, international artists in residence who had permits to come here, but because of the circuit breaker and closed borders, they couldn't come. Usually we work on that for a year ahead, and they're very happy. We had an artist coming from actually the first artist from South Africa, and he was very, very sad because it was very hard to get a visa. Finally, we have everything in place, and then the airline ticket, and then the border got closed. So we wanted to offer them still an opportunity to introduce their work to our audience and to a wider public. So we were thinking about formats. So with the first batch of artists who were supposed to come, we asked them if they have films or video material we can actually share, and we would pay them a commission for that. And then for the next batch of our artists in residence, we actually connected, or like we were also invited and connected with a foundation, TBA 21 Contemporary Art, with whom we work more often. It's a European foundation, and they started something, it's called Stage, and they commission artists, so we could also propose artists. They give them a fee to produce a film or a video, and then we show them together. They premiere in the partnering institution, but the funding is coming from that foundation. So we also looked into our archives. We had quite a number of talks. So we made thematic clusters of talks. And then we interviewed our artists in residence and talk from their homes to the public. Usually they would do that in our single screen. And so we did it that way. And actually the resonance and the response was very good. What we could not do, we could not show our exhibition. And the first thing I really wanted to do as soon as I saw a chance to reopen is to reopen, and if it's only for 5 people at a time. But I think the physical experience of art, particularly in a emotionally challenging experience like a lockdown or isolation, I think to be confronted or have the exposure to works of art, and it can be visual art, it can be music, etc., is very essential because it's also a very healing experience.
Did you gauge some of those emotional responses, or how were you able to elicit feedback on some of those and evaluate it?
It's not necessarily that we solicit this, but I just know from, I mean, we worked after 9/11. We worked after 3/11 with Fukushima and in Fukushima with students then when I was at MIT. We worked after the tsunami in Banda Aceh. There's always, in such moments of crisis, it's really, you need, of course, the Red Cross, you need clean water, you need food, but people need also a bit more because they're going through traumatic experiences. And to me, art is not like replacing any psychological or so support for post-traumatic stress syndrome. But I think it gives us a wider perspective. It gives us a deeper experience of the sense of being and who we are. And I believe in this also when we don't have a crisis. But I think particularly in a crisis, this gives us back a deeper sense of life when we sometimes don't see it in the current moment, when we are confronted really with existential threats.
So what is it about the artworks that you were able to exhibit that are able to have this effect in your view? Because as we know, there are strong moves to the digitization of art, not only the digitization of artworks that are intended for originally perhaps for in real life exhibition and viewing, but also of course the artworks that are designed for the digital arena. So I'm just wondering, what is it about the physical artwork that you consider to be important in this regard?
I mean, online is to a certain extent also physical. It's just a different physical experience. So I work with computer-generated art since the 80s. When I studied art myself, it was the start of a personal computer. And it was very exciting for us, of course, at that moment to understand what is cyberspace, what are the new options, as much as artists explored video or like television as a site to present art maybe to a wider public, or when they went into public space, Robert Smithson, Spiral Chatty, going into nature. So I think artists always explore each space, and the digital is another space. I mean, we look at the moment on our next show, Trinity Minha, who's a filmmaker, and she shifted at one moment to digital film from analog film. And she said, like, she didn't want to do the same with the digital film than she did with the analog, because it offered something else. It offered special effects and layers. So I'm for all of those spaces, but I think it makes us more distinct. What is it that the physical can offer that the digital cannot offer? What can a public space offer, and what is the protected space of the art institution? So I think we become more sharp with what we show where and what functions where. And for example, I'm at MIT to come back to that, and I think that's another alternative that museums should explore, particularly when they have different kinds of works of art also in their custody. We had like a student artwork loan program where actually students can take to their dorms, also faculty, to their offices, and so works of art, like usually works on paper or photography, ranging from Cindy Sherman to Bruce Nauman, etc., for a very low fee. And if you cannot go to the museum and see a work of art, maybe the work of art can come to you, because I think it cannot be replaced. So we don't need to do everything digital. We can also find other ways allowing people to see works of art when we have to do social distancing, for example. But then, of course, we also had talks around art and film screenings. And so many people could watch these. They usually cannot come to our site. So we also saw some of our lectures are attended by more than 100 people. That would usually not be the case for a similar event. We would maybe have 30, 40 people here on site. So we see also the benefit of sharing particular formats. We had also a live stream of our Ideas Fest. And we saw people in the region who usually cannot travel here, in Vietnam, Cambodia, etc., attending. So we also see new opportunities of audiences and of access. On the other side, I think people spend much more time in our current show. They're literally, we're showing film installations at the moment, video installations, and people really spend hours. They come, they know once they're in, others cannot come in because we have limited access. So they know it's a privileged moment and they're spending hours. And that's for me also a new experience. I think the value that people give to institutions, providing them with the experience of art, and I'm sure it counts for galleries and other places as well, because they know we do this now under economical challenges, is very high, and that's very rewarding.
That's an interesting point, that because of the fewer people allowed in because of social distancing measures, it potentially intensifies the experience of going to an art gallery or an exhibition, and perhaps beyond what would have been the case previously when it was more casually done and taken.
I never had before that people would write me and say, we were yesterday in your exhibition space and really this work gave me this, or like it really reminded me on my study time or so, like, or it's stunning. And that ranges from collectors to former students or just audience that we know personally, but also collectors or art consultants. And I said, maybe I have to revise sometimes my idea from people working more in the business. Sometimes we forget that people working in what we call the industry still also do that because they love art. So I think we come a little bit more close to the common denominator, that we really care about art, and not only we care about art, we know art cares about us. And I think that's a regained experience when we're sometimes also busy and it becomes a job. So I think it reminds us the experience of art is more than a job.
So to pick up that rather nice phrase of art cares about us, what about the subject matter that you feel, you know, it's uppermost in your scholarly work? You know, the poetics and politics of space, but also concerns about the environment and social organisation, all of which have been thrown into sharp relief by the present crisis. Is there any way in which you feel that your the work that you've been doing and the subject matter that artists have been doing and that you've been foregrounding has been vindicated to some extent by the current, I mean, in a rather, I wouldn't like to suggest that, you know, in any kind of perverse way, I told you so kind of thing, but I'm just wondering if there is a kind of sense of the, you know, the importance of the subject matter as well as the medium that we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's twofold, as you say. Of course, it reassures that we, and we do this with many institutions actually around the globe, that we really question ourselves, how can we as institutions also be more sustainable, and not sustainable in our existence, but we're shipping artworks around the globe, we produce new works, like we produce infrastructures that we then throw away, and so do we really need that? We start to work with artists and discuss with them, is there a way we can kind of recycle or upcycle what we have in our storages? Do we really need to build everything new? Because we work very custom oriented. Like, so it's not that we ask artists to adjust to our space. We usually do adjust to the artworks in our whole spatial design. That's a speciality of us, because we see us also as a training center in exhibition displays, in exhibition design, in how to show time-based media. So we really put a big deal into this, but of course, that is not always the most sustainable way to do things. So that's a question that is asked from Tate Modern to IMHE, a foundation for art and science with whom we work. How can they address the carbon footprint that they create? So there is a bigger awareness in that respect. The other side is that, of course, we all are dependent from economies. If governments have higher tax income, they can spend more on art. Of course, they would always like to give. Not every country, of course, but many want to, but they cannot. Foundations want to give, but their endowments are down. The revenue is down. Businesses are struggling, keeping jobs up. So it's a very challenging moment for philanthropy. So in a moment where we think we can be more sustainable, and actually to slow down is a good thing, but it slows also down the economy, and that brings, of course, so many jobs in are under challenges. I mean, many people lost their jobs and everything. So in a moment where you maybe need more art, and again, I would not say just the visual arts, but like concert, music, I mean, like really something where people also can have a moment of relief and really engage in something else, disengage maybe with the direct confrontation with the pandemic or economical threats. We cannot do that because we are dependent on a good economy usually. So I think it is really very interesting to me how different countries actually respond. It's not so much the institutions, because I think each institution usually finds a way how they can engage with their audiences, because they know the audiences. But what is the bigger challenge is how do governments deal with support. I mean, my own country, Germany, put, I think, more than 100 billion euros, which is about 162 billion Singapore dollars, into direct relief for the creative industries, including arts, self-employed photographers, magazines, or like agencies who work in the sector. Because they said once we use that people skills, if this small businesses or self-employed communities disappear, to build this back up again might not be possible. So Germany said this is a moment we have to go to our reserves, which is very interesting, while other countries say, no, now art is not essential. In Singapore, a poll said artist is the most unessential worker. Luckily, to a big outcry of a wider society, which was really very helpful. So there are different kind of measurements, what is seen as essential. And I think it is really important to understand that, and this is why I said this, I know from humanitarian relief efforts working in other, we worked also with the relief offices after, in the mayor's office, basically in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, that we need more than water, food, and health care. That's very, very important. But we need also cultural offerings. We need something for the children, etc. So some governments understand if that sector goes down completely, it's really very, it will leave a mark on a society, and it leaves a mark on the mental health of a society.
Yes, that's very interesting, and I think that studies show, including one in Singapore, about the impact of neighbourhood sort of arts initiatives, neighbourhood arts nodes, which showed the vitality of cultural spending, essentially, which kind of supports, it's like a seed bed that supports all sorts of other economic activities and returns, and also improved mental health, community cohesion, and all those sorts of things. So it's usually money well invested, indeed, even in times, especially in times of privation or economic difficulty, which we're now encountering. So, Professor Bauer, with that in mind, what we've been saying, how do you feel about the longer-term future, say the next 5 years or so? I mean, do you feel optimistic, or obviously cautious, or do you feel pessimistic?
Yeah, I think pessimism is never a good motor, even if you're quite, how to say, like, it can be quite frustrating and depressing, certain circumstances, but then on the other side, we know almost everybody faces the same, so it's not very productive to reassure each other in pessimism. So I think optimism is maybe also a little bit too pink-eyed. But I think what is important is to look maybe what might be a priority, or we will have less resources. Can we do more sharing across? So I think we have to look into thinking out of the box solutions. And that's always, I think, something very creative. And this is what we should be. We should be creative, and we should not go into hoping to go back in our comfort zones. That will not work, not in the next 5 years, and probably not in the next 10 years. But can we take an advantage out of that? Can we do things differently, like which we usually maybe wouldn't do? Can we be, instead of being competitive with each other, can we share resources? Can we maybe share an art space? If none of us can afford the rent for one space, maybe it's okay to do one show a year, but we share the facilities. So can we share outreach together? And can we do things more collaboratively? And what is very stunning to me is actually, I think what has changed is that a general public understands, for example, the need to have art and culture. They don't see it anymore. Oh, it goes to maybe something for an elite, or it's something maybe at the moment not well spent. And I think that's something for me very encouraging, that I see that populations that maybe 10 years ago would not have had the same position say, no, now we need that, it's helpful for us. And so I think that is for me something very good. And I think it's also, at the moment, schools struggle with like online teaching. Can we help them with different experiences? And so in a moment of crisis, how can we help each other with the amazing skill set that we indeed have? And like maybe really thinking beyond our usually more close environment and also what we usually have to deliver, and saying it is unusual times, it is different, so maybe that allows us also a point of departure to really not only think out of the box but leave the box.
Yeah, that's a bold call, I think, for the future, and a correct one in my view, if I may venture that opinion, that important reforms in funding or facilities in funding of the arts in Britain. The Arts Council kind of emerges after the Second World War, for example, from initiatives, the idea that you have to have something to live for, really, and that there was an enormous energy behind sort of cultural reconstruction in that period and so on, in the 1950s and so on. So we can see ways in which recovery, I think, that the arts and culture figure in recovery importantly. Thank you very much for your thoughts on that, Professor Bauer. Any concluding views or concluding comments that you'd like to make?
Yeah, I do actually, because I see a lot of institutions, but I also see a lot of galleries struggle. So we see the producers, the artists being impacted immediately, but it's also the network around them, from galleries to foundations to institutions. And I really think this is a moment where states have to step in, where government has to step in, and maybe philanthropy has to gear up, because I think this is seeding, and if these seeds are actually drying out, it will be very, very hard to harvest anything later on, and I think a lot will be lost. We will see a lost generation if you're not doing this. And so I really think this is a moment of joining forces, joining resources. I think we do our share. We really try to strip down our spending by really say, do we really need that? Can we do it maybe more affordable? Because that way we can support the artists more, we can support our staff longer in moments where there are layoffs, there is cutting back. And I think to invest in people and in their creative resources is core. And we maybe have to reduce spending in terms of production costs, high quality, exposure. And as you say, yeah, you mentioned post-war periods. I mean, if we go in a post-pandemic, we cannot just go back to the status quo. It will not work. Yeah, and I think if we can give it a little bit more leeway in that respect, but also really be very generous, I think that would be really something I would like to see to get across.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I mean, for centuries, the art world has pivoted on events of actually getting people there and the excitement of the opening night, the vernissage and all those sorts of things. But in many ways, whilst the broad swathe of art institutions has become more inclusive. More and more people have been visiting museums and galleries, I think, over the past 10 years or so. But some of those kind of major events, the opening night, were kind of socially exclusive spaces as well, weren't they? So we have to sort of think about ways that perhaps, as you say, distribution over intensification of quality, perhaps, or something.
I just think, I mean, I realize now also when we see people one-to-one, particularly we're also going through a challenging situation ourselves. A lot happens when you are sharing the room with a few people. The energy that you can have there, solutions that come up. This you will not have. I still think we can provide the experience of artworks. We also work at the moment on sound walks. We commission artists to do things in the city that can be experienced individually by people, and they're fresh air, they're out there. So I think art can always function at any place, actually. But this kind of conversation that are steered and stimulated through the arts, that's very difficult to do if you say, oh, can we have a Zoom meeting all together? It's not like, oh, you randomly after opening stand next to each other and have a glass of wine, or it doesn't need to be an exclusive event. It's just at the same time running into each other. So much is generated through that, this informality. That is something that is missing, and we really have to come up with a way to kind of compensate what gets lost through the gap of that.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much, Professor Bauer. I should just add that we too in the UK have viewed the German example with great interest and some envy, but of the funding for the arts and culture. So, and I wish you the very best with the Centre for Contemporary Art at Nanyang Technological University, and it was very nice to meet and interview you.
Yeah, thanks so much for the conversation. And see, even a conversation like that sometimes maybe before would not have happened. So I really enjoy to be in conversation about what we need to do with so many colleagues around the world. And I think that was urgent even before the pandemic. But I think now we all know there is no way around it. So I also thank you for the opportunity to speak on this occasion.